3 U.S. soldiers have been killed in a drone attack on an American base in Jordan near the Syrian border. They are the first American military fatalities in the region since Israel's war on Gaza began. U.S. President Joe Biden blamed Iran-backed armed groups and has promised to respond. Iran has denied involvement. At least 34 American soldiers were also injured in Sunday's strike. Jordan's government expressed its condolences to Biden. The American base houses a small number of troops involved in anti-ISIL operations. An Iraqi armed group believed to be backed by Iran has claimed responsibility for this attack. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq, as it calls itself, released this video, which it says shows the launch of the drone that killed the U.S. soldiers. Well, our correspondent Resul Serdar is in Tehran for reaction there. First, though, let's go to Baghdad. Mahmoud Abdelwahed is standing by. So tell us about this group. They call themselves the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. Who are they? What do they want?
Well, the Islamic Resistance is an umbrella term that includes Iran-aligned Iraqi armed groups, and they have been operating in Iraq and Syria, targeting U.S. and coalition forces' military facilities with over 170 attacks since October the 17th. They say they want to put pressure on the United States to stop supporting Israel's military campaign on Gaza. But recently they have risen their demands. They're now demanding a withdrawal of U.S. and coalition forces from Iraq, especially after the counterattacks carried out by U.S. airstrikes in retaliation for the dozens of attacks they carried out against U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. counterattacks killed and wounded a number of their fighters in Iraq. So since then, they have been demanding a withdrawal of U.S. and coalition forces from Iraq.
So since this is an Iraqi group, what do Iraqi authorities say about this, if anything?
Well, we haven't heard from official Iraqi institutions as of yet, but in similar cases in the past, they would come up and condemn the attacks in case it hurts civilians, like what happened in northern Iraq in the semi-autonomous Kurdish region several times when U.S. interests were targeted by this same Islamic resistance. And civilians, when civilians are hurt, then the government, the Iraqi government, comes up and condemns that. But in cases of retaliation by counterattacks carried out by U.S. airstrikes, which killed and wounded a number of Islamic resistance fighters, then the Iraqi government comes up and condemns the counterattacks and, in fact, says it's a violation of Iraq's sovereignty. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why the Iraqi government has been demanding withdrawal of U.S. and coalition troops from Iraq, since it calls the retaliatory attacks against Islamic resistance locations a violation of Iraq's sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you pointed out the context. There are 2,500 U.S. troops roughly stationed in Iraq, and there are some tough talks going on right now between the U.S. and Iraq about potential withdrawal of those troops. Thank you very much, Mahmoud Abdelwahed, for that reporting there from Baghdad. Let's go to Resul. Resul Serdar, you're in Tehran. So we heard about this umbrella group that Mahmoud was just telling us about, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. But for the U.S., this is all Iran-backed paramilitary or militia groups. What does Iran have to say about this?
Well, Iran says that it doesn't have any link or involvement in the recent attacks on the U.S. troops in Jordan. There has been a written statement released by the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman, Nasser Kanani, and he says the repetition of these baseless allegations is a projection and a plot planned by those who find their interest in dragging the U.S. in a new crisis in the region and spreading the crisis in the region to cover their own problems. So Iranian officials here claim that these accusations are coming from the third parties that find the interest in seeing a direct military confrontation between Iran and the USA. But Iran also warns and says that the responsibility of these allegations lays on the shoulders of those who are raising these accusations. So it is an indirect threat that is coming from Iran so far.
But does Iran acknowledge any links, connections, contacts between itself and these groups that have been targeting the U.S.? Not just this one time on Sunday. There have been more than 150 attacks on U.S. bases, whether it's in Syria or in, I beg your pardon, Syria. Now it was Jordan and previously also Iraq.
Well, as you also said, since the beginning of the war in Gaza, there have been more than 170 attacks on the American bases across the region, but not even for a single one Iran has claimed the responsibility. So Iran's official position here is that these groups are not Iranian proxies. Iran says it doesn't have the proxies across the region, but rather it has allies, and it calls these allies as the axis of the resistance. So Iran says that the axis of the resistance doesn't take the orders from Tehran, but rather they act autonomously and they make their own assessments and act accordingly. So that is Iran's official position. But one thing is clear, that Iran says that this axis of the resistance is acting against the crimes committed by Israel against Palestinians. And since the USA is complicit in these crimes, these groups are targeting the US bases across the region. And it says that if the USA wants these attacks to stop, it needs to stop its support to Israel and put an end to the war in Gaza.
Resul Serdar reporting from Tehran, Iran's capital. Thank you very much, Resul.